Today I'd like to continue exploring the Metta Sutta. In fact, in the next few BBCs, looking at one section at a time, primarily so that I can familiarize it with my own mind. Recently, Venerable Chodron was talking about afflictions, and particularly I asked about the affliction of self-hate or low self-esteem. It seems like I just take care of one layer of the onion, and then right underneath it is another layer. And she said, well, I think that's a pretty apt description of all the afflictions. And I found that helpful, because otherwise I think we can get discouraged when we feel like we've made some progress with one or more of the afflictions, and then all of a sudden it's there again. So I really enjoy reading this sutra. It's very short, reading this sutra every day, and thinking about the qualities that are recommended to develop and how to go about using it in our practice. So today I'd like to talk about the first 3 verses of the Metta Sutta, using the Amaravati Sangha's translation, as well as a translation, an explanation of the sutta by Bhikkhu Bodhi that was taken from the Sutta Nipata commentary. Okay, so loving kindness, or metta in Pali, or maitri in Sanskrit, is the first in the set of 4 qualities that characterize what they describe as the ideal attitude of a follower of the Buddha's teachings towards other living beings. These 4 qualities we know as the 4 immeasurables, or the 4 Brahma Viharas. And so we can understand that metta, or loving kindness, is the wish for the happiness and long-term welfare of all living beings. And it's the basis for the other 3, for karuna, or compassion, the wish for living beings to be free of suffering and dissatisfaction. The 3rd is mudita, or altruistic joy, rejoicing in the success or good fortune or good qualities of others, as well as the ultimate joy of liberation and full awakening. And then upekkha. Does this remind you of the cats? Upekkha, or equanimity, an attitude of impartiality towards all living beings. So the foundation of all of these immeasurables is loving kindness. And Bhikkhu Bodhi suggests that by introducing the 4 immeasurables, the Buddha introduced a kind of revolution into Indian spirituality. He makes an interesting observation that in India, before the time of the Buddha, there was great emphasis on refraining from harming others, what we might call ahimsa, or non-harmfulness, like that found in the Jain tradition. But before the time of the Buddha, the Jain tradition, and even in Brahmanism, he says there was no special mention or emphasis on developing positive qualities, such as loving kindness and compassion. And he points out that later in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Brahma Viharas are mentioned, but he suggests that those actually were borrowed from the Buddhist tradition. So that's just an interesting fact, I thought. So the sutra is constructed according to a classical pattern of progression through the 3 higher trainings, the higher training of ethics, concentration, and wisdom. So today we'll look at the first 3 verses that are connected with ethical conduct. So I'll just recite those first 3 verses again. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who seeks the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety may all beings be at ease. So the first line is describing the person who is suitable to practice the instructions explained in the Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness. In other words, by one who is truly good, truly beneficial, and who seeks the path of peace. That's the ultimate purpose for undertaking the practice of metta, is to realize that state of peace, to realize nirvana, or liberation. And that breakthrough to lasting peace comes through developing the qualities of ethical conduct, concentration, and wisdom, which can be supported by loving kindness. Loving kindness covers the quality of virtue or ethical conduct that can become transformed into a meditative practice. One can actually use loving kindness as an object for developing serenity or calm abiding, as a basis, as a necessary support for developing insight. So the sutra begins by listing 15 virtuous qualities that are prerequisites for the development of loving kindness. And it reminded me of that chapter in Living an Open-Hearted Life, where we talk about, or I think it's Russell who talks about imagining the kind of qualities that we want to embody within ourselves. So if we create these causes, then our mind will be more conducive for developing loving kindness. The first one is able, being able or capable. This means one is skillful in leading the spiritual life. We have knowledge of how to cultivate the different stages of the path, so we have to understand something about that, and also how to deal with the various difficulties and hindrances that will naturally arise along the path. So able. Upright means honest and not deceptive. Straightforward means not hypocritical, not pretending to have good qualities that we don't yet have. It's a kind of moral integrity. And then the next line is translated in the version I like as gentle in speech. But really it's two qualities. It's talking about the kind of speech, or actually the kind of person. It means someone who is easy to speak to, someone who is easy to correct, someone who is open to advice. That's something to aspire for. And then gentle refers to having a gentle or a soft character that lends itself to developing loving kindness. In other words, someone who easily empathizes with others and wants them to have happiness, wants them to be free of suffering. And then humble and not conceited as one quality, not being proud or arrogant or haughty, but being humble, willing to regard oneself as on the same level as others or not superior to others. So that's the first verse. There's a lot there to practice. And then the second verse goes into some of what we might call the near enemies of loving kindness. The first one is being contented. So he was speaking, the Buddha, when he gave the sutra, was speaking primarily to monastics about being content with the basic requisites of food and shelter and clothing and medicine, keeping a simple way of life. Easily satisfied means easy to support. And then unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, number 9 and 10. So this means not being involved with many duties so that one can really devote oneself, commit oneself wholeheartedly to this as a meditative practice. Laying aside one's duties and having lighter activities so that you can really systematically go through the meditative practice of loving kindness. So the far enemies of loving kindness are anger and hatred, which are described a little bit later in the sutra. But here he seems to be alluding to these near enemies of loving kindness, like attachment and clinging, which might pollute the practice. And I also would suggest that arrogance might be a near enemy to loving kindness. If we're thinking of ourselves as superior to someone, it's going to be hard to really wish for them to have happiness, I think. He goes on to say, peaceful and calm. This comes from restraining our sense faculties, our sense doors. In other words, drawing the mind inwardly as we're meditating from the senses, drawing the mind away from the senses that leads naturally to a peaceful and calm mind. Being wise and skillful means having a pragmatic wisdom, being wise in dealing with relationships, knowing how to get along with people and activities in daily life. That seems to be an important one. And then he comes back to saying, not proud. So this is similar to that line of being humble and not conceited. But it means not imposing oneself on others, not being impudent, not being obnoxious in our behavior or speech. And then the 14th one is not demanding, not being demanding in nature, especially as monastics, not being greedy or making excessive demands on lay people. And then the third verse says, let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wouldn't that be a wonderful quality to embody 24/7? So the previous 14 qualities are ethical conduct that are associated with more positive actions, whereas this virtue is really pointing to ethical conduct of restraint, not doing the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. if we could do that, we'd sleep well at night. We wouldn't have to worry about going to posada or meeting our teacher at any time of the day or night. And then wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. So all of these qualities form the ethical foundation for the practice of loving kindness. And as we practice with these qualities, familiarize ourselves with them over a long time, our mind naturally becomes transformed so that it becomes more and more amenable or conducive towards the development of loving kindness. So we can, when we read through this sutra, we can just imagine what would it feel like to have these qualities. What would they motivate us to do? How would we act? How would we speak? What would it be like to really embody these qualities throughout the day? Thank you.